wrong one. Good morning. The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations is meeting today to hear testimony on sexual harassment at the Department of Interior. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The Department of Interior has had a sexual harassment problem, and the problem isn't new. For decades, women and men in our national parks, refuges, and other public lands and offices have not been given the protections they need to do their work free from harm. As we sit here, mere weeks after the second anniversary of Me Too, addressing this problem is more critical than ever. In 2016, the Inspector General released a report that documented approximately 15 years of systemic sexual harassment and misconduct in the Grand Canyon National Park. After that report was released, it was clear that this issue could no longer fall to the wayside. Interior needed to take major action. The Obama administration sent an anonymous survey out to all of its approximately 70,000 employees, an unprecedented effort in the federal government. And I do want to point out that this is 15 years. It is Republican and Democratic administrations. The survey was designed to get an idea of whether this was a problem limited to Grand Canyon and the Park Service, or whether it was more widespread. And the findings were alarming. Over 1/3 of all Interior employees had been harassed in some way in the past year. And nearly 1 out of every 10 had been sexually harassed, including both men and women. These numbers are shocking on their own, but the survey dug even deeper. It found that 3/4 of employees who had been harassed chose not to file a complaint or report. They gave several reasons, but one of the top reasons was that they didn't think anything would be done about it. And this is simply unacceptable. Both men and women deserve a workplace in which they feel safe, both physically and psychologically, and in which they believe something will be done if they're put in harm's way. Fortunately, this administration has taken action, for which you deserve credit. Since the survey was released, Interior has revamped its policy, instituted new training, and required each bureau to draft a regularly updated action plan, among other efforts. And these were all steps in the right direction. But this summer, the Inspector General released a report which highlights ways in which Interior can further strengthen those efforts. We look forward to hearing more about those needed changes and how Interior will dedicate the resources necessary to make those changes. But we also need to have a frank conversation today. While the right policies, procedures, and training are obviously important, they're only one piece of the puzzle. As we've heard from experts over and over again, addressing sexual harassment begins first and foremost with effective leadership. Leadership must not only say they are committed, they must show that they are. They need to cultivate a culture that promotes diversity and inclusivity across all levels of the workplace, but especially in top leadership and management. They need to engage those who've been affected by harassment in helping to craft the organization's solutions to the problems. And perhaps most importantly, leadership needs to earn the trust of its workforce. Employees need to believe that their leaders will support them, stand up for them, and hold wrongdoers accountable. And unfortunately, I fear that's not the case at Interior. This administration has been marked by secrecy and distrust. We've seen time and time again, both in the press and in the testimony before this committee, accounts of employees being manipulated, intimidated, and ignored. And I'm going to say, as a woman herself who was harassed during her 30-year career at a large institution, because I didn't think leadership did care or would step up, I thought I'd pay a price if I opened my mouth. And that's what we're trying to change across the country and Interior's got that responsibility. Most recently, the Bureau of Land Management abruptly announced it was moving its headquarters out west. Reports of a closed-door meeting with affected employees shows that not one of the employees supported this move. One employee even said, quote, "Morale is low as I've ever seen." At a full committee hearing this summer, a whistleblower from Interior testified that this administration has, quote, "sidelined scientists and experts, flattened the morale of career staff, and by all accounts is being hollowed out as an agency." A mass reassignment of senior employees in 2017 created a culture of fear for stepping out of line. None of this sounds like leadership that's committed to earning the trust of its workforce. And if workers do not trust their leaders, how do they feel that they're valued? How can we expect them to trust that their leaders will protect them in their most vulnerable moments? Making public statements is easy, but making real change in addressing an issue as challenging such a difficult issue as sexual harassment takes trust, engagement, and real leadership. We hope Interior's leadership will take that message to heart today. And with that, I now recognize my dear colleague, Ranking Member Gomert, for his opening statement.
And I thank my dear friend, the Chair Dingell. Thank the witnesses for being here today. This is obviously a very important topic, and it certainly is to you, or you wouldn't have taken the steps that you did, and you wouldn't be here today. So thank you for that. I know we all agree everyone deserves a place they can work that is harassment-free. Sexual harassment shouldn't be tolerated. And we all want the Department of Interior best equipped to address allegations and to address any misconduct. For decades, workplace harassment at the department was permitted to fester far too long. In the past, when harassment was reported, investigations into those allegations were mismanaged and poorly addressed. And as my friend, the Chair, has indicated, this has gone across Republican and Democratic administrations without being properly addressed. I'm encouraged that under the Trump administration, the department's finally taken concrete steps to implement changes to address these long-standing issues. Their efforts are making a positive difference for our federal employees. To begin, the department implemented its first comprehensive policy on how to prevent and eliminate harassing conduct. This policy was developed to meet the criteria to be a model anti-harassment program laid out by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In addition to implementing new policies, each of the department's bureaus developed action plans on how to ensure a harassment-free workplace. Each of these plans is uniquely tailored to the needs of the individual bureau. But the department did not just update its policies. Under Secretary David Bernhardt and Assistant Secretary Susan Combs' leadership, the department took action to ensure employees understand the new policies and know how to report workplace harassment if they experience it or witness it. And as the Chair mentioned, it's not enough to have those policies. All employees must feel that they can report real harassment and something will be done. It won't just subject them to further harassment. So anyway, individuals are finally being held accountable for their inappropriate behavior. In December of 2017, the department, under the Trump administration, announced termination of 4 senior department officials due to workplace misconduct, including harassment. Following year, more than 1,500 employees were fired, suspended, or reprimanded for harassment or misconduct. What we have now is a department where you can believe it when they say harassment's not tolerated. Every employee deserves to work in an environment that's harassment-free, and the department has shown a steadfast commitment now to continuing to address this issue that plagued it for so long in the past. I'm especially glad we're joined today by Assistant Secretary Susan Combs, a Texan and also a friend who did a great job while she was working in the state government, and who is now leading the efforts to combat harassment, transform workplace cultures across the department. I look forward to hearing more about her plans to utilize the newly established Workplace Culture Transformation Advisory Council to achieve these goals. I know Assistant Secretary Combs, and I know that she is eminently qualified to lead these efforts. Her guidance is an invaluable asset to the department. The changes that have already occurred under Secretary Combs' leadership are having a real impact. We can see the positive results of the department's work. After the department's policy changes, the percentage of employees who have experienced some form of inappropriate behavior in the previous year dropped from 35% in 2017 to 18% in 2019. That's obviously still too high, but at least it's moving in the right direction. Work remains to be done, but we're pleased that with the work that you have done, we're pleased you're here, and we're pleased the department's commitment to harassment-free workplace has already resulted in improvements, and future efforts will continue. We look forward to hearing what you have to say here today. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. I don't see Mr. Bishop, so I'm going to introduce our witnesses. Mr. Mark Greenblatt is the Inspector General in the U.S. Department of Interior and has been doing good work on this. Ms. Susan Combs is the Senior Advisor exercising the authority of the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget at the U.S. Department of Interior, and as we've learned, from Texas. And Ms. Hai Feldblum is the Partner and Director of Workplace Culture Consulting at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius LLP. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left, and then red when time has expired. After the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask you questions. And with that, the chair now recognizes Mr. Mark Greenblatt.
I thank the chair, the ranking member, and committee members for the opportunity to appear before you today. I stated throughout my confirmation process that helping to eradicate the department's ongoing sexual harassment problem would be a priority for me as Inspector General. So it's fitting that my first testimony as the IG is about this important challenge and the role the IG can play in improving the culture at the department. The IG's office has taken a leadership role in identifying these problems over the last 4 years. In 2016, the OIG published a watershed investigative report about widespread sexual harassment at the Grand Canyon. The investigation revealed that Park Service personnel had engaged in a long-term pattern of sexual harassment and fostered a hostile work environment. In all, we identified 35 individuals who endured or witnessed mistreatment. The report also highlighted a disturbing absence of strong leadership, which allowed the harassment to continue unchecked for 15 years. The Grand Canyon report was a wake-up call, and that investigation led to others. The IG's office has opened 22 sexual harassment investigations since that case in 2016. We've uncovered sexual misconduct in parks as large as Yellowstone and as small as Canaveral National Seashore, in a remote BIA office and at the DOI headquarters, in locations stretching across the country from Georgia to California, and involving behavior ranging from disturbing, inappropriate touching to outright criminal sexual assault. The department, to its credit, has taken disciplinary action against 35 subjects as a result of OIG investigations and agency referrals. The department also took steps to change the culture. Just months after we published our Grand Canyon investigation, Secretary Jewell created the Employment and Labor Law Unit and released a new workplace conduct policy. DOI later conducted a comprehensive work environment study, and Secretaries Zinke and Bernhardt took a number of actions to further address the problem, including issuing an anti-harassment policy. We recently released our evaluation of DOI's efforts to address sexual harassment. We found that the DOI has taken meaningful steps to address sexual harassment by investigating complaints, issuing policies, requiring training, conducting surveys, establishing an advisory hotline, and developing a tracking system. We also found, however, that there is more work to be done. With that in mind, we made 11 recommendations in this evaluation. The department has resolved and implemented 3 of them and has implementation plans for the remaining 8. We are encouraged by their response. These improvements should foster a safer working environment for all DOI employees. As the department continues its anti-harassment efforts, the OIG staff and I will remain committed to this issue. We currently have 8 active cases. In fact, just last night, one of my special agents called from an Oregon courthouse reporting that a fish and wildlife supervisor had pled guilty to 5 counts, including sex abuse, harassment, and felony coercion. Due to our investigation, that offender is now in jail. And when he's released on probation, he will be a registered sex offender, banned from any contact with the victim. In addition to our ongoing investigative work, next month we will release the Top Management Challenges Report, which will include a section on workplace culture and human capital that highlights how the negative effects of harassment are widespread and sap productivity and trust out of an organization. The OIG is exploring additional ways to add value in the future, and we are considering new inspections and evaluations as we create our 2020 audit plan. In closing, I commit to you that the OIG, under my watch, will continue to aid the department in its efforts to foster a safe work environment free of sexual harassment and assault. And to all the witnesses, to all the survivors and witnesses listening today, please come forward, either to the OIG hotline or to the departmental avenues available to you. Our investigators take this work to heart and understand that this is a very personal issue. In fact, the supervisor of a survivor recently wrote to us, "I cannot say enough positive things about the OIG agents or the way they interacted with both myself and the supervisor. Their professionalism, tact, and responsiveness were eclipsed only by the gentle compassion and care with which they interacted with the survivor. We strive to have that impact on every case." Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Greenblatt. I'm going to call on Ms. Coombs next, but I want to apologize that you have been confirmed as Assistant Secretary, which I'm just kind of got put in the chair here. So congratulations, and you're up next.
Thank you, Chairman Dingell and Ranking Member Gomer. Good morning, and thank you for holding this hearing on this important topic and inviting me to update you on the progress that the department has made and continues to make on the issue of sexual harassment. The department is committed to preventing and eliminating all forms of harassing conduct and to transforming our workplace culture so our employees feel safe, respected, and valued. In early 2017, the department administered a work environment survey to all employees completed in March. The survey was the first of its scope done across the department, and its goal was to assess workplace conditions that interior employees experience, including the prevalence and context of all forms of harassment. The results of that survey were sobering. Of those employees who responded to the survey, 35% reported experiencing some form of harassment and/or assault-related behaviors in the 12 months preceding the survey. Several facts stood out. Over 20% of employees reported experiencing harassment based on their age. 6.5% of employees reported experiencing gender-based harassment. Another 8% reported experiencing sexual harassment. What was especially troubling was that 60.2% of employees who reported that they had suffered from harassment indicated that these events occurred more than once, and oftentimes the victim had to continue working with the harassing individual. Furthermore, many stated that they felt making a complaint did not produce any real result. Either no action was taken or they were encouraged to drop the issue. The Secretary and the department leadership took these results very seriously and instituted a number of actions immediately. The first was the Secretary's anti-harassment policy statement. Then Deputy Secretary Bernhardt directed bureau heads to develop formal action plans to address their bureau survey results, which required quarterly reports. That same month, the department issued its first comprehensive policy on the prevention and elimination of harassing conduct to provide a work environment free from harassing conduct and to hold employees accountable at the earliest possible stage. In February of 19, we created the Workplace Culture Transformation Advisory Council, and it is charged with identifying specific department-wide programming. In April of 19, the department launched an enhanced agency-wide misconduct case tracking system, which allows Interior to identify trends and to ensure that managers take action when harassing conduct has occurred. In May of 19, 6 department-specific harassment-related questions were included for the first time in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, Phevs. I am pleased to report that the recent Phevs results for 19 show that we are unquestionably making progress. For example, the percentage of Interior employees who reported experiencing some form of harassing conduct within the preceding 12 months was reduced from 35% in 17, as reported in the Work Environment Survey, to 18% in 19. In addition, the number of employees who know where to report harassing conduct increased from 62.3% to 94% in 19. Moreover, more than 80% of supervisors and managers believe they have the tools needed to promptly address allegations of harassing conduct and to discipline individuals who engage in it. While this is all impressive, the July 2019 OIG evaluation report of the department's efforts to address sexual harassment highlights that there is still work to be done. Let me first acknowledge and compliment the extensive work that the OIG undertook in this evaluation. In its evaluation, the OIG identified 3 areas for DOI to focus its efforts: improve sexual harassment investigations in terms of quality, cost, and timeliness, use misconduct tracking system to monitor trends and track costs, and better coordinate anti-harassment training. Within these areas, the OIG, as stated, made 11 recommendations, and by the date of the final report, they had already resolved 3 of those. The department has developed an action plan for the completion of the remaining recommendations. And for example, we are now in advance of 8 months in advance on scheduling training. In response to recommendation number 5 regarding investigations, we have already launched new data fields in our misconduct tracking system that will provide greater transparency. In November, next week, we will start delivering more than 70 sessions of bystander intervention and intergenerational training in strategic locations across the country. They'll be 4 hours in duration and be presented in-person audiences. We continue to communicate with and train leaders at every level committed to preventing and eliminating harassing conduct. This afternoon, in fact, I will be leaving here and going to address about 1,000 employees at the U.S. Geological Survey on actions to improve and transform the workplace culture. As an agency, we have made significant progress, but there is more to be done, and we look forward to continuing our positive progress. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Ms. Feldman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Chai Feldman. I'm a partner in the law firm of Morgan, Lewis & Bockius. From 2010 to 2019, I was a commissioner at the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. My testimony and the answers to questions you may have reflect my views and not necessarily those of Morgan Lewis or its clients. During my time as a commissioner of the EEOC, I worked with my fellow colleague, Commissioner Victoria Lipnick, to study how employers might prevent harassment. Although Commissioner Lipnick and I came from different political parties, we were joined in our commitment to stopping and preventing harassment, which is truly a bipartisan issue. In June 2016, Commissioner Lipnick and I published a comprehensive report on how to respond to harassment when it happens and how to prevent it from happening in the first place. I have submitted that report as part of my written testimony. Here are 5 key takeaways from the report. 1, leadership. The best way to stop harassment in the workplace is to have a culture of safety and respect in which harassment is not tolerated. Leaders have the ability to create such a workplace. They need to do 3 things. First, leaders have to believe that harassment should not occur in their workplaces. Second, they have to articulate that belief and the expectations that follow. And third, they have to act in a manner that makes their employees believe they are authentic. 2, accountability. Let's be real. The most important steps that leaders can take to establish they are authentic when they say they don't want to have harassment occur is to hold people accountable. Individuals who have been found after full and fair investigation to have engaged in harassment must be disciplined, and corrective action must always be proportionate to the misconduct. Second, managers who see or receive reports of harassment must be held accountable. Those who ignore complaints or who blame the person coming forward must be disciplined. Those who respond appropriately should be rewarded. Finally, anyone who retaliates against someone who has reported harassment or participated in an investigation must be disciplined. If individuals are allowed to retaliate, people will not come forward. 3, risk factors. I was pleased to see that the IG's report encourages the department to look at the risk factors we had delineated in the EOC report. Let me just mention 3 here. 1, decentralized or isolated workplaces. An agency can have the best policy or procedures at headquarters, but in decentralized workplaces, individual supervisors often reign supreme. And in isolated and remote workplaces with only a few employees, that is an additional risk factor. A young workforce. Young workers may not even know what's unacceptable in a workplace. Young workers who are themselves managers may not know how to respond to harassment. And high-value employees. Allowing a toxic employee to act with impunity, regardless of how valued the employee is otherwise considered, has significant costs to an agency. 4, reporting, investigations, and training. Sort of pretty basic here. An agency must make it easy and safe for those who experience harassment or who observe harassment to report those incidents. This includes having multiple reporting avenues, responding in a manner that make employees feel it is worth reporting, and keeping employees safe from retaliation. And in terms of training, one needs both the basic anti-harassment training and respectful workplaces and bystander intervention training. And finally, culture. Ultimately, stopping harassment depends on having a workplace culture that doesn't tolerate it. The work environment survey undertaken by the department is an exemplar of an effort to assess one's culture. And if it continues to be done, that will provide important trend data for the agency. I find in my practice at Morgan Lewis that it's particularly effective to pair surveys with focus groups and interviews of randomly selected employees. That can provide greater and more nuanced insights into the culture of an organization. In conclusion, I hope the ideas I've presented here will assist you in your important oversight of the Department of Interior's efforts to stop harassment in its diverse locations. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, once again, we thank the witnesses so much for being here. I understand the gentlelady from Michigan has a scheduling consideration, so we'd like to recognize her for 5 minutes. Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Feldblum, this committee put out a report on sexual harassment issues in Interior in early 2018. The committee relied heavily on the task force on sexual harassment, for which you were the co-author. We want to personally thank you for all of your hard work on the report because it was invaluable. But in your testimony, you mentioned that there are certain risk factors that may put an organization at a heightened risk for sexual harassment to occur. The committee's report examined data that showed that several of these risk factors do exist at Interior, including non-diverse workforces, significant power disparities between men and women, geographically isolated workplaces, and decentralized workplaces. Although the committee didn't have access to data sources that could help determine whether the other risk factors exist as well, it is possible that they do. Do any of the other risk factors come to mind when you think about Interior? For example, the Grand Canyon case features a high-value employee, and the Park Service has had a lot of young seasonal employees. So I'd be interested in your feedback.
Sure. One of the key things Commissioner Lipnick and I did with the task force, there was a select task force in the study of workplace harassment, was thinking about how to be proactive to stop harassment, before the EOC showed up at the doors of the employer. And one thing was to consider risk factors. And just because there's a risk factor doesn't mean harassment will occur. It just means leaders need to think proactively. And we had 12 risk factors, and you noted a number of them. I do think the young workforce is a real key risk factor, and the training needs to be customized to those young workforce. I think what we called in the report the superstar harasser, which is simply the harasser that is considered of high value, a top performer, which of course is a logical fallacy in that. You can't be a top performer if you are causing harassment and people are leaving. So I think power disparities, diversity, homogeneous workplaces with just a few women, people of color, that's a problem. So I commend the department for what it's doing already and urge you to look at that report.
Thank you. Mr. Greenblatt, your report highlighted the risk factors as an area for Interior's bureaus to explore in their action plans. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so as we were going through our analysis, we recognized that the subject matter experts had done, their presentation, and we thought that would be helpful for the various bureaus. Some of them did include that in their individual action plans, and what we were recommending is that the remaining bureaus that hadn't considered the EEOC's risk factors to look at those, and there's no reason for them to recreate the wheel when you have the subject matter experts laying out the risk factors that they should consider.
Thank you. Ms. Combs, given the importance of these risk factors in planning an organization's effort to address harassment, how is Interior planning to implement the Inspector General's recommendations?
Well, I have a timeline, and we're obviously on track with all of those, but I want to sort of address it at a higher level, which is really about culture, civil training for leaders. We launched that in April of 17, and we demanded within a 2-year period that all supervisors be given that training in person around the globe, and that has been done. As of February, there were 9,000 supervisors have been trained. Secondly, it was made part of their individual performance standards. There are 13,114 supervisors, and they all now have that embedded in their performance standards. Thirdly, training. We have a contract with a third-party vendor who's going to do online training for all 70,000 employees, and that will be customized to the various bureaus. That will be customized across the department, and we, of course, welcome input on that, and that will probably happen late summer. It's going to take us some time to do that starting next week. There will be 72 4-hour segments. As I mentioned, we'll be training about 2,160 people, and so we're trying to do this from sort of bottoms up as well as top down, and the Workplace Culture Advisory Council, which I chair, has all of the assistant secretaries on, all of the deputy assistant secretaries, the bureau leadership, and we make it a point to say that this is very, very important throughout the department.
Thank you. I'm down to 7 seconds. I'm going to take a point of personal moment, which is to say that it's got to, at the top, people have to protect people who come forward. They can't be viewed as troublemakers. So even when people go through the motion of addressing the problem, but they're still totally ostracized in the workplace, nobody hires them, nobody promotes them because they're labeled as troublemakers, that's still too real in workplaces, not just at Interior, but across the country, in corporations, et cetera. So leaders have to lead on making sure that doesn't happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. The chair will now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And personally, I can't imagine anybody considering Congresswoman Dingell a troublemaker, but anyway. I'm curious, and we do appreciate your work, Inspector General. You mentioned that somebody's in jail today. Could you tell us a little more about the facts of the case? I think it's helpful for people out there that may be tempted to act similarly.
This was a situation of a supervisor who was making untoward advances, physical advances on another employee while they were in a remote location, that included laying on top of her at one point, this was not this was totally inappropriate in every way.
I would say, yeah. And hopefully people will get the message. That's just unbelievable to me that could even happen. I'm hopeful that having superiors closer to the people that are out there doing the work may also help stem the tide of those type activities. And we noted previously 99% of all the land that the BLM controls is west of the Mississippi. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that are quite comfortable here in Washington that are not looking forward to going to Grand Junction. I think it's great. And my understanding is there will actually be supervisors closer to the people with whom they're working. Is that correct, Secretary Combs?
Yes, sir. And in fact, two things are important. When the new policy bulletin was issued in 18, it said a person can complain to any supervisor anywhere. Because of the remoteness issue, you can't be trying to address your supervisor who may or may not be the bad person. And so that was an important change. And I would say, secondly, with the move west of the Bureau of Land Management staff, getting decision makers out in the field where they can take hold of things immediately is obviously desirable, and it does make a difference. And from that perspective, I work with the field special assistants. There are 12 of those, and so I had a conversation with them just last night. And they are appointed by the secretary, and they're in all the regions, and they understand their role in this particular matter. And they were talking with the human resources people yesterday from 3 to 4, and I talked to them from 4 to 5, and I thanked them for all of their work. And I said, you're leaders in your region, and you represent all the bureaus. And I said, I expect you all to help continue making this effort to go forward. And so they shared with me that they have been having they have executive councils in the region made up of all the leadership of all of the bureaus in the particular region, and they meet regularly. And I said that I would be sending them some of the materials that we have. I think this group of individuals, they're all career, except for 2, they're all career individuals, and they truly embrace and understand their role as collaborating between bureaus. They're not representing a bureau, they're representing the Department of the Interior, and it is their job, absolutely, to effectuate these policies that are so important. I would say on a personal basis, this makes a big difference to me. I launched a women's empowerment group in 2015 after I left state service. I've got a 4-year-old granddaughter, and I am not letting anybody get in my granddaughter's way. And so I will just give fair warning. But this is important, and chairing this council has been both a privilege and a pleasure. And so I welcome input, I welcome advice, because there is nothing more important than we can do to create a respectful workplace where people feel valued and that they are heard. If they speak, we listen.
Well, I appreciate that, and you've looked at Ms. Feldblum a few times as you spoke, so I'm sure you got a great deal from her study, her report. And one of those things in her report was that strong leadership is identified as a key factor in effectively addressing harassment in the workplace. How are the current leaders at the Department of Interior demonstrating their commitment toward strong leadership?
Well, Secretary Bernhardt also has a daughter, and he and I have chatted about women, and he has given me all the budget that I've needed for this effort. He's given me the resources. He's issued messages, and when he goes around the country, he talks about these efforts and how he wants to transform the Department of the Interior. And he's a longtime hand at the department, and I think people know that he's sort of WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. He's very, very linear.
Thank you very much. My time's expired.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Feldblum, and thank you to Member Dingell for reading my opening statement, but in that testimony, we've seen example after example of low morale and distrust in current leadership among Interior employees. One of the most egregious examples is the very recent abrupt announcement that the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, is going to be moving its headquarters out west to Grand Junction, a place that's relatively isolated, small town in Colorado. This committee did a hearing exposing the sham that's that relocation. A predictable effect is that employees who are going to be made to uproot their lives with very little notice are upset. In a recent article, employees were said to be questioning the wisdom and the quote-unquote moral courage of leadership. Early in this administration, over 24 senior employees were suddenly reassigned to different duties and locations. When the OIG asked them about who was chosen to be reassigned and why, DOI tried to cover it up. And these reassignments sent a clear message to all interior employees: step out of line and you'll suffer. Ms. Feldblum, in your experience, is it possible to fully address an organization's systematic culture problems with sexual harassment if the workforce doesn't trust its top officials?
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Feldblum?
Right.
Ms. Feldblum,
and
please,
then-
and then I'll have you
Right.
speak to that as well, Ms. Combs.
Yeah, so obviously, I don't know the information about the Department of Interior itself. I will say that it's important to have a culture of respect all the way across an organization. And that's respect in terms of encouraging people to come forward with their opinions, in being able to raise their concerns. Because if you have that overall culture of respect, then it will be easier for people to come forward with their complaints about harassment as well. So again, I don't know specifics of Department of Interior. I can say the social science is clear that people need to feel respected and valued in order to feel comfortable coming forward with complaints.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Combs, it's the committee's understanding that the BLM plans to proceed with the transfer despite the opposition of the affected employees. And in fact, some have speculated that this move is just a tool to get employees unhappy enough to quit. How is Interior going to regain the trust of these employees after this move takes place?
Well, I am not in charge of the move from the Bureau of Land Management, but I will say at the overall interior level, I would echo the comments made about we do have to have sort of an open society, we do have to have open conversations, we do have to have a culture of respect. And we issued 4 questions last April, to which we got about 11,000 responses. A survey, folks at the department said they wanted to be heard, they wanted to feel respected, and they liked the department, but that they wanted to be engaged. And so what we believe is that our bystander intervention, our intergenerational training, all of these things which we're engaging with these employees, and then the online harassment training is going to be helpful. With respect to the move, as I say, I support the move because I think from a policy perspective, when all of the land is in the West, I think it's important that you have the decision makers at the local area. So again, I'm not in charge of the BLM move, but I would agree with your comment that yes, it is important to have an open conversation with the people that you are supervising.
Do you think moves like these at all that are really made without consultation or with really the employees that are unhappy about that move, it doesn't lead to much buy-in on from them? And do you think that creates a culture of distrust amongst senior leadership with the employees?
Well, again, I don't know the particulars about who is or is not happy with the move. I do know that this was a thought-out process, from what I've been told, from BLM for about 2 years. And they evaluated, they took a look at selecting Grand Junction, and I have actually been to Grand Junction, and I kind of like the city.
Have you ever seen the rationale for that move?
Have I ever seen the business case for the move?
The business case and the rationale for that move?
Well, I believe there is a business case for the move, absolutely.
Have you ever seen it?
I have seen a draft business case for the move. Yes, sir, I have.
Well, this committee would like to see it as well sometime. That brings me to the balance of my time for this around the section, so I recognize the ranking member once again.
Why don't you go ahead and go to...
I beg your pardon there, and thank you so much, and beg your pardon. I'll recognize Mr. San Nicolas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Combs, just some observations in your testimony. The awareness of employees in terms of where to report harassing conduct was at 62.3% in 2017, and it went up to 94% in 2019. What would you credit what was done to increase that awareness for the employees?
Policy Bulletin 1801 was issued in April, and it was very prescriptive, and it went to all employees, and it held all of the human capital employees responsible. As I say, it was followed up with the training performance standard that came in the fall. I would say that the timeline that is in place right now, within 1 day, within 24 hours, if there is a complaint made, there are several steps that have to be taken within that 24 hours, and people understand they will be held accountable for that. I would also add that the IMARC tracking system, people understand that there are timelines in place, and those will be followed. What I think was actually another reason for this, I think the report that came out in 2016 was so horrible. It was such an eye-opener. And I think people were just astonished and shocked at what had happened to those folks in Grand Canyon and elsewhere. And I think it prompted the kind of soul-searching that obviously should have taken place earlier. And I'm very sorry to hear about the event that Mr. Greenblatt has referred to last night, recurring last night. I just think it's a constant repetition that has to take place, and people have to be held accountable, which is why there is this training, the civil training for leaders. That covered 9,000 people, and that was face-to-face, and that was around the globe. They even went to Guam and Hawaii to meet people face-to-face to impress upon them, this is serious. We're taking this seriously, and I think that has an effect. And so the new training that are coming on, I think those are important, and people want them. We're getting great response. People say, yes, we want to be trained, and we look forward to being heard.
I just wanted to observe, I think that it's a really good thing that the awareness thresholds have gone up that dramatically. And I also think it's a really good sign that the instances dropped while the awareness increased. I think that shows that the agency has been doing a very good job of targeting the high-risk areas and addressing those high-risk concerns, because when awareness is only at 62.3 and you have a 35% reporting rate, and then it goes up to 94% and you have an 18% reporting rate, and that shows that the problems are really being tackled. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that and get an idea of why the thresholds were so low to begin with. Do we know why there was such a lack of awareness back in 2017?
I think there was a unfortunate culture that I think didn't encourage people to feel heard. I mean, the data from the Workplace Environment Survey made that clear. I mean, you read the statistics, and it's very troubling. And I think you have to do a major course correction. And I think that is what they have done. But it's never over. And I would sort of give as an example, who would have thought 20 years ago or 15 that online bullying would be the kind of problem that it is today? We weren't ready for it. And so online misbehavior is a threat any place, and person to person is a threat. What I also found interesting was in the workplace report was that the peer-to-peer was about 54% in an office, face-to-face, one-on-one. And so it wasn't outside, it wasn't at a party, but a lot of it was just peer-to-peer. It wasn't even supervisors, which means that struck me as being interesting. It wasn't so much power disparity as it was people just saying things, and that's why the bystander intervention is so important. We had a very high number of people saying, stop, and even if the victim didn't say it, the bystander did. And so we're working on enhancing the bystander intervention training, and that's going to be 2 hours of all these sessions across 72 sessions. We think that's going to be helpful.
Well, I thank you very much, and I hope the trend continues. And once the awareness is already at this kind of a level, of course, getting it to 100% is always ideal. But bringing these trends further down is, of course, the target, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to see more implementation of the IG report in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. San Nicolas, and the chair will now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it is nice when we have bipartisan goals that align with each other. And I'm curious, Inspector General, how do you intend going forward to get the word out to people? And I realize it may not be fully your responsibility, but you can certainly have an effect. But getting the word out to people about somebody going to jail and having serious consequences as a result of these inappropriate actions.
Sure. Well, moments like this are certainly helpful in that regard. One thing that's critical is that the victim went to, reported the issue right away, and then the supervisors reported to the OIG, and we took it all the way to the,
There was no hesitance in reporting it
I didn't hear you.
There was no hesitance in reporting it forward. Sometimes we have a delay, and that contributes to the problem when there's any delay at all in reporting.
Certainly, but
by a supervisor going upward.
Certainly, we'll take old cases. That is certainly helpful when they come as fast as possible. In this case, it went right away. She went the next day to her supervisors, and they came straight to the OIG, and we pounced. So this is one way that we can sort of spread the word, as you said. We also want to stay on top of it in terms of conducting investigations. As I said, we have 8 active cases we're going to continue. We're also going to work with the department and help oversee their efforts in terms of training and ensure that folks know that they can come to the OIG or the departmental avenues that they've made available. We can help evaluate the nature of the training that's going out to all the employees, as Ms. Coombs mentioned. That's a way that we can stay involved going forward, monitoring the investigations, the quality of the reports that are coming forward in the investigations. That's one thing we found in this report, is that there was a sufficiency problem with the investigations that the department was doing or was contracting for, is they weren't legally sufficient. So then the agency, the department, couldn't then take action because the underlying investigation wasn't, the report wasn't of good enough quality to take action on. That's one thing where we can add value as well. So I think there are a number of different routes that we can add value, but spreading the word is certainly something that we're engaged on and trying to do as much as possible.
Secretary Combs, having been a felony judge, we've seen times when there was instant outcry by a victim and then not always immediate action, and it seems to go hand in hand with what Ms. Feldman was talking about, strong leadership. How do you intend to get the word out to supervisors that they cannot delay, they must move forward if there's a report of inappropriate action?
The policy is they shall turn it around in one day. They shall report up to their supervisor, they shall contact the lawyers, and they shall contact law enforcement if necessary, or OIG. That is a 24-hour period, and that is not flexible. It's 24 hours period.
Well, that's excellent.
And I would say also, I used to be a prosecutor, and I used to handle child abuse cases, and I'm well aware that you have to have legally sufficient evidence.
Understand that. We also, we heard the report that previous administration had not been meeting or the Department of Interior had not been meeting the EEOC requirements. Is Interior now meeting the EEOC requirements?
Well, we are in, obviously, good consultation with the EEOC, and our policy has met all of their requirements. It meets their model policy. And our training, we run those by the EEOC, and they approve them. Our latest round of training to be department-wide within 24 hours. So yes, we're in constant touch with them.
Thank you. Again, thank y'all for being here today. Appreciate not just your being here, but the work you've been doing on this important issue.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And Ms. Combs, in your testimony, you referred to some of the findings from the Federal Viewpoint Survey that showed positive results, Interior's progress to rooting out harassment in the department. And that is obviously great news. But I do want us to be cautious about declaring victory prematurely, and I'm sure, as you well know, comparing results from 2 different surveys could be problematic. And from what I understand, the Federal Viewpoint Survey that was conducted earlier this year and the Work Environment Study that Interior conducted in 2017 are 2 completely different survey instruments. small changes in wording, how the survey is conducted, or when the survey is conducted, can have significant effects on the findings of that survey. And so that's why members of this committee have repeatedly asked Interior to repeat the work environment study that was conducted in 2017. I think we feel that that will be the only truly accurate way to determine whether or not progress has been made since then. That being said, I certainly want to commend Interior's efforts to include questions about harassment in that federal viewpoint survey. And I'm very interested to see the exact wording of the questions that were added. Would you be willing to provide those questions and the findings from those questions to us?
Yes, and let me also add that I think I'm going to try to ask OPM to put these questions in everybody's survey. I think if we have hundreds of thousands of federal employees, I think we need to get the baseline established with the Phevs. We have a very good participation rate. We had the second highest participation rate on this Phevs of any department over 50,000. We had about 58% participation, which means they wanted to be heard. And so that was quite good. So I think if we could get OPM to these questions to all surveys, all Phevs, I think that would be a good step forward for the entire federal government.
Yeah, that would be a fantastic step forward. I commend you for that. Would be a little concerned that it's already not coming down from the top, and no disrespect there. But Ms. Philbin, in your testimony, you talked about the importance of using climate surveys to assess the culture of an organization. And again, adding questions to the federal viewpoint survey is a great start, but could we address sexual harassment more thoroughly and quickly with a recurring work environment survey?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just struck by how good this workplace environment survey was that the Department of Interior did. I've seen many surveys. I've created some myself. Very good survey. And that's why I think one has to be careful to say 35% said they experienced harassment based on that survey, and then using the 18% from another survey. You really have to be careful about that. But I think the best, obviously, would be to have that workplace environment survey repeated at Department of Interior. But from my perspective, this hearing could end up being a phenomenal success, right from the fact that if Assistant Secretary Combs does get to OPM and ask for those questions, when I was a commissioner at the EOC, I went to them constantly asking for those questions to be added to the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. We got, from the EOC, we were told we could have 2 for the EOC, so we put in 2 about harassment and culture. I'm amazed that Interior got 6. I guess they're a little bigger than EOC. But what would be amazing is if the leadership of OPM put these questions in for all the agencies. And then what would be even better is if Department of Interior did its workplace environment survey again, and so did other agencies.
Yeah, to a certain extent, what I was mentioning out before. We have about a minute left here, but Ms. Combs, I'm very interested about the workplace cultural transformation, the Workplace Culture Transformation Advisory Council that you had mentioned. Can you give me a little bit more color on that?
Yes, this is something that I created because I was worried about sort of the culture, and I wanted to have this thing be very granular. And so we have all of the bureaus participate, and Tammy Duchene, who is a former National Park Service person, she was very involved in some issues there at the National Park Service. She's leading that, and she's right now on her way out to USGS. And so she's already been to Albuquerque. She's traveling around to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and she's sort of talking about this. And we had done a 4-question survey last April, which was, we got over 10,200 responses, which I thought was pretty wonderful in about a week and a half. We will do one again this spring, and that will be assessing how we are doing, so we think we're making progress.
Great, thank you so much. Gerald and I recognize we stand on the next list once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go ahead and yield the balance of my time to yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll recognize myself again, and to follow up a little bit more about the Workplace Cultural Transformation Advisory Council, and if you continue on that. I would love to hear that much more about that.
Yes, we've got a website, and that was launched this morning. We've had it already, but it's up on the public for now. You go to doi.gov/employees/transformation, I think. And it is a way for us to sort of talk to everybody across the department. And what we're doing is we're having what I call the points of contact are meeting all the time. We are sending out messaging. We're sending out slide decks that can be used all across the department. And what Ms. Duchene is doing is she is putting together teams from all of the various bureaus and giving them guidance on communication, et cetera. And so we have a communications individual working on this. Obviously, the Chief Human Capital Officer is very supportive, and she is spearheading all of the training, the 72 four-hour sessions on bystander intervention and intergenerational. That is her baby, which starts next week. And we're trying to do this from a variety of areas, and she's also the one that has put together the team to go ahead and do the all-department training. So we're pushing this at various levels. Some people like in-person training. Some people prefer online. They may not want to be face-to-face with you, but we're trying to push all of those, and that's just for the next few steps.
Great. And how are you measuring baseline and then the progress towards your goals?
The baseline?
Baseline of your culture and progress towards the transformation to improve the workplace culture.
So the baseline that we're using right now, the one we just got, is the Phevs. That is a baseline which will then, because it will be the same survey, it will continue forward. We're also getting input in, people have the ability to email us, but the main thing is you do have to get the input in from the individual employees on how things are doing. And so we think that the Phevs is a great tool, and it obviously it's a tool. It's not the only tool, but it is a tool, and it will be repeated, and it's free, which we like.
Great, thank you so much. And then, Inspector General Granular, in your report, one of the main findings had to do with the cost of harassment investigations, and at Interior, individual offices are currently responsible for bearing the cost of those investigations. And unfortunately, that means some of the smaller offices and bureaus may be hit especially hard by a particularly costly investigation. The report mentioned that this could have a quote-unquote chilling effect on offices when it comes to investigations. One of the report's recommendations was to implement a system for bureaus and offices to share costs so that no one office is unreasonably burdened. Can you tell us a little bit more about that finding?
So one of the concerns we heard, and we don't have any data on this is more of a theoretical issue at this point, but it is a ripe issue that could arise, which is if you're in a smaller office and there's a complaint that comes forward, and that office then has to bear the cost, that could impact their training, that could impact their ability to carry out their mission. And so therefore there's a concern that if there are employees in a smaller office, they may be less willing to come forward and incur that cost on their own office. Be it the survivor, the victims themselves, or a witness may be reluctant to come forward. At the same time, we understand from the department's response that they want to, that some of the bureaus want to hold those local managers accountable by making them pay for investigating that misconduct. So there's a balance there that the agency has to weigh. But one of the things we wanted to identify is that chilling effect is a real concern, especially for the more remote locations that may have a smaller budget, which an investigation could then impact in a significant way.
And Ms. Coombs, in your response to the Inspector General, it's this is one recommendation that you only partially agreed with. You concluded that keeping investigations costs local may serve as a way to keep the managers or supervisors in those offices accountable for not creating the right environment to prevent harassment. Doesn't making local offices bear the burden of the investigation costs create a disincentive to investigating these cases?
Well, I think the Inspector General is correct. So we're approaching this from two perspectives. We're going to be looking at the working capital fund being used as a vehicle which spreads the cost across the department, as well as December the 1st, our new third-party vendor comes in with a fixed cost plan, and so that will be, he'll be that end of that group. third-party vendor, that award will be given on December the 1st, and so we'll have sort of two approaches.
Great, thank you so much. The chair will now recognize Congressman San Nicolas once again. He waves. And the chair will recognize myself once again. And very good. So thanks so much, Ms. Coombs. And Ms. Feldblum, do you agree? Is it a good idea to use investigation costs as a way to essentially punish managers and supervisors for not flushing out all the incidents of harassment? And could this, could this strategy actually disincentivize managers and supervisors from conducting investigations? Could this discourage employees from reporting incidents of harassment?
Yeah. So I think it's very important to incentivize managers to not have harassment in their workplaces. It's not a good idea to do that incentives by, for example, saying, we're going to see how many harassment complaints are coming out of your division, because then the managers they can subtly and not so subtly tell people, I don't want to hear, and then I don't have to show that I have complaints coming out. Same thing is to say you're going to have to bear the costs and you're worrying about what that might do to your other mission goals. That's not a good idea. So I am encouraged by what Ms. Coombs just said, that move the costs to some central fund. Get a good outside company that's doing the investigations at a set cost that hopefully will not come out of their budget, but then hold them accountable on how safe they have made the environment, how many complaints are coming forward, how they've been dealt with, and put that in their performance evaluation. That's going to be the best approach.
Great, thank you so much. And back to the EEOC task force report, which you co-authored, and other expert resources contend that a lack of diversity in an organization and harassment often go hand in hand. Can you give us a little bit more information, color on that?
Well, I think some of this is probably common sense, right? If you have 10 men in a workplace and then one woman comes in, or 10 white people in a workplace and one black person comes in, and you have just even one or two of those people starting to harass that new person and no one else intervenes, that's a problem, right? I mean, it's almost common sense. It's just that the data shows that it's actually true. So obviously you have to change the diversity of that workplace setting, and you have to change the diversity up the top so people know that there are leaders who are people of color and are women, and that makes a difference. I will say, and I'm thrilled to hear about these 70 bystander intervention trainings that you all are doing. I actually feel one of the contributions we made in the EOC report was to bring this concept of bystander intervention to the workplace. People were not talking about that, but in our research we saw that universities and campuses were using bystander intervention to train students how to intervene to stop sexual assault before it happened, by distracting someone, pulling them away, by directly intervening, by telling someone about it afterwards. And we said, maybe we could apply this to the workplace. Now, obviously, the power dynamics are different in the workplace than student to student. So the intervention training, and we offer that for Morgan Lewis as well, has to take into account the power dynamics and what's a reasonable option for intervening. But if you do that, and if the leadership on the top tells people, we want you to intervene, that's huge. And paying for bystander intervention training is one way of communicating that. And then supporting bystanders who do intervene, like acknowledging them, recognizing them. Let's make the Department of Interior a model for the other departments by the work of your subcommittee and IG. That would be nice.
Well, thank you so much about that, because I mean that does bring rise to really kind of my next question. And the Western Values Project found that among the 104 political appointees at DUI, women only represent 28%. And among the 221 board appointees, women make up only 25%. The rest of the workforce at Interior is pretty male-dominated, women generally making up about 40% of all Interior employees. And so, is that an issue at all, that women are making up such a small proportion of leadership? And certainly, if you have the time, I would like you to comment on the racial and ethnic diversity. Is it similar important to have people of color represented in positions of leadership when it comes to combating harassment?
Certainly, it's essential to have women, people of color, people with disabilities in positions of leadership. Again, that takes intentional, strategic plans. I mean, at Morgan & Lewis, I run a whole diversity and inclusion practice, helping employers to get from here to there. It's not easy, but it's absolutely doable.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Combs, I certainly would love for your input and thoughts on that, because former Secretary Zinke didn't seem to agree, frankly, with Ms. Feldblum. He made several comments, quote unquote, diversity isn't important. I don't care about diversity. I don't really think that's important anymore. And certainly as acting secretary that oversees the Office of Human Capital, Office of Civil Rights, do you agree with these statements? And what is Interior going to do to recruit more people and women, people of color and women, into positions of leadership?
Well, this is a great conversation. I'm glad to have it because I think certainly I am, my shop at the Policy Management and Budget is very, very diverse. But it's hard sometimes to get people into a department which is perceived as maybe not so diverse. So we have just launched on October the 1st something called the Career Pathing, and it is novel, and we had a woman from the National Science Foundation come up, and so what we're trying to say to people is, please come to the department. There are all kinds of things to do. If you are here, you are not going to be stuck in your job. There are career opportunities, and so we're approaching this from two ways. One is you can plug your name in, and you can talk about the kind of background you already have, and it will say, well, gosh, Myrtle or Bob, you might be eligible for these. Or you can say, would you like to be, you plug in the job and say, how would I get there? And the response from the Department of Interior employees has been fantastic. They want more opportunities, they want more jobs, and I think they're going to be adding 95 more positions to be talked about, so people will want to come. And obviously STEM is a problem all across the country, and you have girls who code, et cetera. And so we want to be sure that we give the employees the opportunity to take learning. DOI University, the DOI Learn is very, very useful. But we are reaching out, and we're talking across the government. In fact, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget is leading an intergovernmental issue on career pathing, getting people to want to stay and make a permanent career out of federal service, which we think is a noble calling, and understand that there are opportunities. And so there's diversity in jobs, there's diversity in people, there's diversity in opportunity, and we want people to walk in the door. By the way, their initial training when they come in now, they are given all of the anti-harassment training. They are told from the day one on the job that this is the culture here and you're going to have to subscribe to it. So we're trying it across a bunch of fronts, and we will keep on working.
Well, thank you so much. And once again, thank you all for the witnesses for coming in today. One final question for all of you, very simply. Is there anything else you'd like to say today that you haven't already had the opportunity or the chance to say? Mr. Greenblatt?
Just reiterating that we stand ready to help survivors and witnesses of misconduct. We encourage them to come forward, either to the OIG or to the department. And to the extent we can add value going forward, we look forward to the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Combs?
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very pleased that this is such a bipartisan effort and approach. And as I said earlier, we much appreciated Mr. Greenblatt and his team's report. But there is much to be done. We look forward to doing it, and we will not rest.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Feldblum?
Well, I highly commend you for putting together this hearing. Thank you for the opportunity to see how some of the EEOC report recommendations have been carried out, and I truly hope that it can go from this room out to many other agencies, and that you can encourage your colleagues to look at other federal agencies as well.
Thank you so much. That is a sentiment and a goal for all of us. Once again, I want to thank all witnesses again for being here today. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.